Welcome to the Man Amongst Men podcast. Live a life of intentionality, adventure, and brotherhood. Take the inner journey and live out over your edge constantly. Here are your hosts, Dominick and Bryan.
100% serious question. How much would your life change on a dime if the contents of your porn browsing history suddenly became public to the most important people in your life? Your partner or spouse, your friends, your family. How much would things change if they knew what you were up to? Because porn is that thing that we do in the shadows, and in today's conversation, Bryan and I are bringing it out into the light. Porn, the not-so-subtle side effects of life's modern-day forbidden fruit. And man, we had such an awesome time talking about this that we end up, spending about an hour and a half going over these details. And so we've split this up into two separate episodes. And we are going to highlight some of the things that you may not know about why porn is so appealing, and yet how it can also sabotage your work, your life energy, and your relationships without you even knowing. I'll be sharing my story about 4 years that I spent off of pornography, why I went that way, what I learned when I was off it, and why am I back on the sauce now in a very different way than I was beforehand. I'll also be sharing with you the 5 stages that every man goes through with respect to his relationship with pornography throughout his life, and why most men will be stuck at stage number 3 for their lifetime. And make no mistake about it, this is not a porn shaming conversation, because Bryan and I will be talking about why we both use pornography, how we both use it, and how it can play a healthy and exciting role in your sex life if used with intentionality. But this week, I've got a very special treat for you. I have an audio clip from one of our live events, the Discerning Dick events that we do here in New York City, that absolutely brought the house down. This is a 5-minute audio clip from Max Stossel, an award-winning poet who shares his hilarious and provocative and thoughtful speech about his journey discovering porn, what it taught him, how it led him so far astray, how it led him into questions of his manliness, of guilt and shame and secrecy, how it affected him in his relationships with women. And I'll tell you guys, this was an absolute mind-blowing experience. I've heard this poem about 30 times because the more you listen to it, the more depth you'll find in it, and the insights and the wisdom are so profound. And like I said, Max absolutely brought the house down. So enjoy today's conversation about part 1 of pornography. And without further ado, I bring you Max.
Thanks for having me. Max Stossel, circumcised. It's nice to meet you. I enjoyed, there were so many dick puns that were fun to make, on the way in, just announcing loudly, "Hi, I'm here for the dick event." It's just it's a really fun event to be a part of. But yeah, I think you really started to touch, this has been fantastic. I'm really excited to be here. And you started to touch on a lot of growing up with porn, growing up with that being, a 12-year-old kid and having everyone be talking about the same thing. Every movie, every TV show, all the characters on Friends are obsessed with this sex thing. And then you're a 12-year-old kid, and you're just not really sure what that sex thing is. And so where do you go to find that out? And if you're not confident enough to be hey, Mom and Dad, can you explain the sex thing to me? Porn becomes the answer to that. And I learned about sex through a variety of porn sites. That's the way 12-year-old Max learned what girls like. I typed in each variation of boobs.com I could think of, with the zeros, with the Z's, with the 8s. A problem later solved through the invention of Pornhub. A friend recommends with a big fat grin, thinks he's more of a man because of where he's been. Remember, this is pre-Google, and Jeeves had kids. So that night I ran home to fire up my dial-up. You've got mail. I don't care. My adolescent boner is tucked into the waistband of my underwear, and there are limitless women, and their pussies are swimming at the thought of having penises shoved recklessly in them. I'm like, www.pornhub.com. And And suddenly I'm seeing everything that's trending: gangbangs, cum shots, rear-ending, never-ending, the breadth of my selection as intense as my erection. Holy shit, give me a second to turn off parental detection. It's hilarious that they tried to put it up there in the first place. First base, second base, third base, fourth base, fifth base, sixth base, seventh base, eighth base. Women seem to love being treated like objects, though this is something to which we'd rationally object with even the slightest mix of common sense and innocence. But when 12-year-old eyes watch enough face-fucking belligerence, it starts to seep into our sexual welcome to our sexual subconscious. Mixing my primal desires to pounce on these lionesses as they part the lips of their blushing vaginas with genuine young curiosity of what this all means. All these men I've seen in movies and on TV obsessed with the very same thing. And according to porn, it's women on their knees begging for our seed. It's using the female body for our whims, desires, and needs. Tricked into nudity so easily before being discarded so casually. It seems men are meant to dominate this lesser species. That's what porn taught me being a man means. That's what porn taught me being good in bed means. Porn placed this deeply misguided lie in me. And look, maybe pornography can help us live out fantasies and explore our spectrum of sexuality, but personally, it was more education than it should have been. And for that, I have to take some responsibility. But think about how easy it was for me to pop open my laptop screen and watch all these societally picture-perfect women moan and scream as they look back at me, and for all practical purposes, it was me because I was into POV. That's where the camera sees what I would see. And God knows I was getting no real pussy at age 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, so due to what was strictly availability, porn became my sexual reality. And unfortunately, I don't think my story's an anomaly. I didn't learn physical intimacy was a possibility until around my mid-20s. Making love was just fucking stripped of its masculinity. I was using women as vessels for masturbating, most of whom were so used to being treated without dignity they wouldn't bother telling me. To avoid bruising my ego, they'd just endure my incompetency. And anyone out there rolling your eyes at me, as honestly I would have been, I ask you to explore the possibility that maybe the sex we learn from porn in American society is actually, when applied to reality, usually just really bad sex. Is it fun to smack some ass and unleash our dominance? Hell yes. But we've been taught something that expresses a tiny portion of what sex can express. The junk food of our consciousness. Men can come like women, which is way more intense. And I got to trade porn for watching the woman I loved dance so freely on top of me, it may be the only time I ever truly understood femininity. Sex is fun, but there is mind-dropping, soul-wrenching beauty when it's mixed with vulnerability, creativity, and intimacy. If you had told me in college how hot breathing with our clothes on could be, I would have laughed you off heartily. But luckily, I met a woman stronger than I would have been if I were she, to slow me down and feel the heat of our breath. Move up and down and in and out through our chests. To show me that love and sex don't have to be two separate things. Show me the difference between ecstasy and crotch sneeze. I'd been doing crotch sneeze. That I've been trying to do life's greatest puzzle with just one very basic piece. How far away from where I want to be pornography had taken me. And turns out I don't have to pretend to already know all the answers to the female body. Turns out they're all unique. And it's okay to ask. It's okay to learn. It's okay to breathe. On the other side of porn for me was this limitless magnificence and just a glimpse, and I ask you to take a chance. Take a break. Be a man. It's worth exploring. Thank you very much.
Bryan, how talented is our boy Max Stossel?
Man, he hits all the highs, all the lows, and he spoke to some real truth that even I probably hadn't explored before.
Yeah.
So he's a talented human being.
He's amazing. Max Stossel is a buddy of ours. He's part of the same Monday night men's group that Bryan and I get together with every single week. He's a co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, and he's obviously an award-winning poet. And he's given us an amazing jumping off point to talk about one of the journeys that every man goes through kind of unwittingly and on his own, which is the journey, the hero's journey through pornography. You know, I see really two camps of people when it comes to the hero's journey on porn. 95% of men fall into this first category, which is they don't even know they're on that journey, right? It's never inspected. It's never really even dived into it all. And then there's this other category, and you and I see a lot of this as we're having more and more conversations around sex and sexuality and pornography. There's this other group that has awakened to a lot of the hidden dangers in pornography, and Max touched on a bunch of them. We're going to go deep into those. But this other group tends to almost create this new judgment around porn. Porn is evil, porn is horrible, porn is bad, porn is wrong, eradicate it. You see it reflected in TED Talks, like why I gave up porn forever. And there's almost like the pendulum swings way too far to the other side. And what you and I are offering up here is more of a balanced conversation in between. What are some of the merits of pornography, but what are the pitfalls of like never inspecting your relationship with it? I'm going to share a little bit about my own journey of taking 4 years off of pornography. And we also have what we've broken down to, or at least I've broken down to in the 5 stages that I've seen most boys/men going through as they are introduced to pornography and how it unfolds over the course of their life. And Brian, I'm going to give you a chance to react to because you haven't heard these before. And just to see how well you relate to it, because it's not doctrine, it's just kind of how I've made sense of the world. And ultimately, we want you to walk away with a little bit more curiosity and awareness around what role porn serves in your life so that you can end up having better sex with your partner, but also your partner can feel like you were more connected with them at the end.
Yeah, I think for me, Dom, since the beginning of my sexual time, there's always been an innate feeling, a little bit of shame even that, porn's something that maybe I shouldn't be doing. But man, it's great for so many things. Right. And that's the extent that I had really thought about porn and how it played into it. And it's been through these reflections that we've been talking through that said, wait a second, it might be a little bit different. So I'm curious to hear what your journey is and some of these stages that you referred to.
Yeah, I mean, let's dive into it. I have so many questions from Max's. I mean, we've heard it like 20 times now. I don't know what 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th base is. I still don't quite know what crotch sneeze means, but I'm sure I can, I have certain ideas of what that may be in difference from ecstasy as he talks about. But I think the first stage to really help give context for how I see most boys, and I say boys because that's the age that you are introduced into porn, right? Boys, probably somewhere between the ages of 6 years old up to 10 years old, are discovering pornography. And so the first stage in this process, and there's 5 Ds, the first stage that I've identified is called the discovering process. Max is 29 years old. I'm 39, you're 37. Max discovered porn online. He said that when I was young and I was watching Friends and they're talking about this sex thing, I don't know what that is, but I want to learn about it. Where do you turn? You turn to porn. And he grew up in the internet era. So he had these like 10-second video clips that he was able to download. When you and I were discovering pornography, our entry point was very different. My entry point as an 8-year-old was discovering a Playboy magazine, right? Like a very 2-dimensional experience with unfolding porn. And like the centerfold was the highlight of my experience, but there was no moving pictures. There was no penetration. It was just like boobs were, and bush, I guess you could say. Boobs and bush were like the pinnacles of that sexual experience for me. Max entered, as he said, with gangbangs, cum shots, rear ending, never ending. That is a little bit more accelerated than what you and I went through. And what do you think some of the implications of that are?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this is the old story that we used to hear from our parents, where it was, I had to go to school uphill both ways in the snow. I feel like that's us for porn. Yeah. Well, we only had analog porn, and we had to flip through it. We had to hide it in our closet somewhere so our parents didn't find it. So we had a really rough growing up. But the reality is people growing up with access to interactive porn, let's say, even more so than even, let's say, 5-10 years ago, the ability to be confused, I think, is one of the biggest changes. And the confusion comes from, well, I'm seeing it here. I don't have anything else to compare it to. Maybe I'm not even having sex yet. Yeah. It's certainly something I'm uncomfortable talking to my parents about. So what is my reality? And I think Max has a line in it about that. And then porn becomes not just the reality of what sex should be, but it also becomes our educational tool.
Yeah.
And that is certainly true for me. And I'm sure we'll dive into what that is. But I think that's the biggest danger of the accessibility of porn out there today and the reality of it.
Yeah, one of the things you just said that requires double clicking on is this comparison thing, right? So when you and I were looking at our first introduction, our entry point to porn in this discovery stage was a Playboy magazine. We weren't comparing ourselves to other men. Men weren't in Playboy magazine. It was just the woman. So you just had a chance to look and admire and feel what you're feeling. Porn, very different. When you're going online and you see penetration, intercourse, gangbangs, a whole other element is now introduced. The comparison game is introduced.
Right.
And what's introduced there is not a subset. It is a very small subset of totality, of actuality. So you're seeing grown-up men, grown-up women, men with these oversized appendages. My mentor bought me a book called The Penis Book, which was written by a, what's the name of the doctor?
Urologist.
A urologist, right. So written by a urologist, and the stat in there is that 2% of men have over 8-inch long penises. The average penis in porn is 8 inches. And so
so the average male porn star has an 8-inch penis.
Yes.
Wow.
And
okay.
2% of the population has an 8-inch penis or larger. So basically,
This is like the equivalent of NBA basketball players' height.
yeah.
Right, the average NBA basketball player height compared to the regular guy that's out there.
Yeah, I mean,
interesting.
Okay, so like the analogy I like to make is when I was, let's say Max's age, when I was 12 years old, the thing I wanted to be more than anything in this world was a baseball player. And on TV, I had a chance to witness what greatness looked like. I would watch Ken Griffey Jr., Don Mattingly. That was like the bellwether for greatness. And I also was part of a 12-year-old baseball team where I got a chance to see who was the best kid in the 12-year-olds, who was the worst kid, and I could figure out where I belonged in that mix, right? So at least I had a basis comparison of where I was trending against kids my age and then what the North Star was for greatness.
So you could see what a pro is like.
Yes.
And you could also see what Jimmy down the street is like and also Tom on your team.
Yes.
Right? So you had some real basis of comparison.
Totally.
Okay.
Sex. Chances are for most people, the only time you ever witness sex that's not your own is when you're watching porn. Especially as a 12-year-old kid, most 12-year-olds aren't having sex yet. You're only masturbating. And so the only basis of comparison that you have is what you're seeing on your computer screen. And like Max said, this is a subset, a very small and not realistic subset of reality. And yet you have nothing else to compare it to. So this is what you're starting to discover is like, whoa, is this what men look like? Is this what women look like? Is this what sex is supposed to be? And then here you are, a barely pubescent young individual receiving all that information and starting to formulate opinions and ideas. And by the way, we've kind of tipped over into the second stage with this. So the first stage what I was talking about is discovering, and that's all about like the entry point. But what we're talking about now is kind of that second D, which is the downloading stage. Downloading is like, what are the messages that you're downloading, that you're receiving? And some of the things that like we just talked about is what does a man look like? What is his penis size supposed to be? How aggressive is he supposed to be? And what were some of the things that you heard Max talk about in terms of messages that he downloaded?
Well, it's definitely the comparison piece of it in terms of I'm a man and compared to another guy who is a pro athlete in this category and has been selected to do this. But also it's what women want and what their reaction should be. And I could start comparing myself to the women that I'm with and why aren't they acting a certain way?
Yes.
I think that's a big piece of it. Also, the thing that you just don't see in porn is all the stuff that happens before the camera starts.
Right.
So you don't see anything on the consent in a porn is literally a contract that is signed.
Yeah.
There's also the lights and the camera and the audio and it's a movie.
It's an act.
It's an act. I think growing up, all of my beliefs, even though it seems logical and you kind of know it, again, with no basis of comparison, what else is there?
Yeah, and let's hit on the consent thing. So consent is absent from porn. You never see a porn star saying like, sweetie, would you like it if I grabbed you by the back of the head and shoved my cock down your throat? It just happens all the time. You never see consent for, would you like to have anal sex? The dick just goes right into the butt. Like that's what happens. You never see consent on, is it cool if I come on your face? It just happens, right? These are things that just happen. And so as a 12-year-old child, when you're watching this, or you're watching a gangbang, or whatever you're watching, there's no consent anywhere. And so you start to learn as a kid, you're like, oh, wow, I don't have to ask. And in fact, asking is a form of weakness. But what you're saying is that consent, actually, like in most porn, all of that consent is mapped out in written paper and form. And you hire actresses and actors based on what they've come to agree to do.
Right.
The problem with that is that most men think that if they're not aggressors, or if they have to ask, that they're weak, that they're not manly, and it's a threat and an assault on their own masculinity. When in fact, like we hear from women, one of our friends who attends our Discerning Dick events, she's a dominatrix. Like this is what she does for a living. And she says, she's like, listen, Dom, like I enjoy having my ass smacked. I enjoy having my throat choked and my hair pulled. But I enjoy that after I've established a basis of trust with that man who's asked me in advance. And she's like, those things like choking, spanking, hair pulling are now just assumed okays. Guys do this to me without ever asking for my consent. And I feel used. I feel objectified. I do not feel safe. And men have learned that through what they've downloaded in porn.
That's right. And there was one point on this too. We keep talking about a 12-year-old watching porn.
Yeah.
And we're not advocating that 12-year-olds should be watching porn. We are saying the reality of it is, and what Max said, 12-year-old Max, right? That's what they're seeing.
Yeah.
So I think the consent piece of this and where we get our education from, right, porn shouldn't be it, but these are the things that we see at 12 years old, and here's the things that we feel what is right.
Yeah, listen, man, I 100% is we're not advocating. I wouldn't even begin to know what age is the right age. But the reality is that kids are probably accessing this even earlier, right? So when Max was growing up, there wasn't the iPhone. So he's 29 years old. There was not an iPhone where kids have either access to their parents' iPhones or their friends' older brother, older sister has an iPhone or an iPad. It is so easy to just grab one of these devices and access it early.
Yeah.
So the reality is that for anyone has kids, they have exposure to this at a very early age. And I think about how I accessed, again, the Playboy. I was a sponge. I had genuine curiosity around, like, what did it look like? These things that were like these boobs that were covered in everyday existence. Or maybe I saw Victoria's Secret catalog and I was like, I want to know what's on the other side of that bra. And I had access to it. I was just genuinely curious to discover what goes on over there. And then it escalated at at a slower pace. Now it's just like, bang, kids are flooded with a tidal wave of this stuff. And the next stage, as Max talks about this, he goes, I was getting no quote unquote real pussy from age 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I would also probably believe that most boys' realities is that they're not going to be sexually active for a number of years after they've discovered this for the first time and after they've discovered masturbation. So now in isolation for years, they're consuming this stuff maybe multiple times a day. They're beating off to it multiple times a day. I sure as hell know that I did from the ages of 12 to 17, 18 when I first had my first sexual experience with a girl. So 5 to 6 years of isolated training and behaviors and patterns that I deeply entrenched. At that point in my life, it was a third of my life before I actually physically touched another human being.
Right.
Fuck, the wonder shit goes haywire.
And nobody there to tell you that, hey, that's not appropriate, that's not right. That just is what it is.
Yeah. Who intervenes? Yeah. So this is where the downloading stage, which is the second stage, so the first one's discovering, the second stage is really around downloading. This is where we start to form our worldview, unwittingly. This is what women like. Penises shoved recklessly in them, as Max said. And they seem to enjoy being treated as a lesser species, right? They seem to enjoy being dominated by men. And men seem to be the ones who are the aggressors. They're always the ones who are instigating, and they're the most athletic. They have to have a raging boner at all times. They have to be able to put you in.
Yeah, that's something else you don't see in porn very often, is a soft penis.
Right?
So all of a sudden now, as a guy, it's like, I better have a hard dick before she sees it.
Yeah,
or before
that.
Yeah, I think before you take your pants off, before you want to have like that's what you've seen in porn, and you want to make sure that that dick is hard, ready to go, and lasts anywhere between, let's say, 45 minutes to 4 hours.
Yeah, right. Right.
Because that's what you see. Yeah. So I think there's certainly that. There's also the how she should be reacting, which we touched on earlier. Yeah. And if at a younger age, if I was connecting with a woman or even having sex, and she's not screaming and getting off and having an orgasm, well, I'm clearly doing something wrong.
Right.
And that can turn into a very dangerous, almost like ownership of orgasm, right? Of her orgasm.
That's right.
Which is not reality at all.
That's right.
Either. So there are all these different elements of like comparison and what the reaction and where I need to be from a performance standpoint, all of which is not reality.
Right. The expectations of how a woman is supposed to respond to you. In every porn you watch, there's like this over-exaggeration of how much she's enjoying it. There's screaming. There's constant feedback, right? And the feedback is always, you're amazing, right? It's like always, this is outrageously amazing. And then, in reality, there's some women who aren't expressive. There's some women who are shy. Women who are uncomfortable, who are self-conscious about what's going on with their bodies, how they look in a particular light, how you make them feel, right? And all of that can be contributing to her reaction or lack thereof, but the expectation has been embedded, again, over years of conditioning of watching porn about a way a woman's supposed to react. And then when that's not happening, it can immediately be sensed as what's wrong. And the thing that we hear from a lot of women, again, because women talk about this stuff more often than men, is that women are not often feeling safe in the environments that men create for them. One great story is I had a chance to watch Cindy Gallup do a talk about 6 or 7 years ago. Cindy is the creator of a website called Make Love Not Porn. She took the stage, first words out of her mouth were, I'm 50-something years old, and I like to sleep with men in their 20s. And as I'm being thrust into the 7th position in the first 6 minutes of having sex with them, I've come to learn that they have grown up and learned about sex in a very different way than I did. Most of their education was done online watching pornography. And when I grew up, no one talked about it. And so she was like, I found that these younger men were acting, were performing, had learned all the behaviors from what they witnessed on porn. And so she's like, I decided to create this education movement about how to make love and not porn. And one of the examples she gives is, in the porn world, every woman is ready for anal sex at any point in time. In the real world, some women are into it, some women are not. Proceed with caution. Porn world, every woman loves to be finished off with a cum shot to the face. Real world, some women are into it, some women are not. Proceed with caution. It's fascinating because that's the reality that I see a lot of women, especially when I'm talking to younger women, they're constantly feeling pressured to act like a porn star, moan like a porn star, to acquiesce to the 15th different position, or even do things that they don't necessarily want to do because it's almost like an expectation to be choked, to have their hair pulled, to have their ass smacked. And all of it has been learned behavior from the one resource that most guys at a young age have to turn to, which is the privacy of their own home and Pornhub.
Yeah. So girls growing up also watch porn? That's a thing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so now we're setting expectations on both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
With what are the expectations, how should you be performing, and everything else, with very little actual conversation. Yeah. I mean, when I think about rules of porn, also, we talked about consent already and performance. But how about, to Cindy Gallup's point, some women are into anal, some are not. Proceed with caution. But even if they are into anal, it doesn't just go boom and you're in, right? There's some nuances to anal sex, including a conversation. So I think, yeah, man, as far as downloading goes and world views go, that's the biggest step of non-reality that we get to, is what are all these rules that we're feeling and perform to, or expect ourselves to perform to.
Yeah, and the bottom line is, this worldview is developed unwittingly, right? It's unconscious. And again, because we don't have conversations about this, I never had a conversation about this with anybody, for 18, 19, 20 years. It was all done in isolation. So I had no idea that I was laying a foundation for the rest of my life around what my expectations were of women, what my expectations were of myself. And that carried forward into every relationship that I had. So again, we're not not trying to make porn wrong, but if we don't understand the massive influence that it's had in our lives and our worldview shaping and our belief systems and how that translates into the sex that we're having, then we're having some really bad sex. Third stage. So the first stage we talked about is discovering. Second stage is really about downloading. This third stage is where most men, I think, spend the rest of their lives. And this is the stage that we want to help to disrupt. But the third stage is really drifting. So drifting is this basically hypnotic rhythm that you just show up through life with, right? It's your habits and patterns that are unconscious, uninspected, that drive your behaviors. And so drifting could just be you come home, you're stressed out, you use porn, you medicate, you whack off, you're done, rinse and repeat. You're drifting because what once used to excite you no longer excites you, and so you escalate. And I know that you have a pretty interesting story about how the first time that you log on to use porn to masturbate in a day is very different than the second time, and then what you look at the third time, and then what you need to look at for the fourth time. I think this is a really good example of drift. So could you be willing to share it?
And this has all been unconscious, let's just say up to very recent.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So I have a website that I go to. It's real people or real couples literally just posting photos. It's not video. It's not anything. And there's usually a little story attached to it, like, my wife Jane and I went to the hotel and we thought it was fun to have a sexy time. Like, here's her in her bikini, and then here's her topless. Like, what do you think? So it's a pretty
tame,
cute, innocent, tame. It's a piece of. So I go there because I like the reality of it. And then maybe that's it. Maybe I finish there. But if I don't, then I'd say, okay, well, what's next? Because there's only like 3 posts a day or something like that on this site.
You burn through that fairly quickly.
You burn through that very quick. That could be a 5-minute deal. That could be a 20-minute deal. Who really knows? The second thing then is there's a newer porn medium out there, which are these cams, which is some real people, they're all real humans, but some actors and some non-actors are doing a live stream. And sometimes it's solo.
What's the difference between an actor and a non-actor?
A non-actor would be somebody that is literally just at home and they're like, I want to put my cam on and show myself off.
So they get excited by people watching them just do that.
Exactly. It's a very voyeuristic type experience. Okay. But there's most cases there, it is set up and it's a professional thing. So you were back to the unreality of porn.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so that's called stage 2.
Okay.
And then stage 3,
what do you think about stage 2? What is it that does that for you?
It's actually an escalation of the very first part, which is the seeming reality of it, like real people.
Why do you like the real people thing? What's up with that?
I don't know. I have to think about it.
Yeah.
Why do I like it? I think because I know it's not as fake, maybe. You see some of the funniness that happens that you don't see in a traditional porn.
Okay.
And it's also, for the most part, pretty soft core.
Okay.
We're not getting into any hardcore stuff yet for the most part. I'd have to dive deeper on why I like that.
So this is an example in motion right now about maybe a little bit of drift, right? It's just not even knowing why.
Totally.
Because to some people, couldn't care less if it's a real person or an actor. It's just just give me the hardest core thing possible. But there's something for you that you seem to enjoy about the reality element of it. And I know that exists for me. And I'll share a story, which I've shared with you before, about how I've gravitated towards quote unquote real porn over manufactured for a very specific reason, but keep going.
Yeah. So then if I finish with that, let's say if I don't finish with that, if I don't have an orgasm at that point, then I'll escalate to the next thing, which is now we're going to a Pornhub or another site that's got the clips and you can search for everything.
Yep.
And then I might look for something a little more hardcore.
Yep.
And so that's been the escalation process. And I can tell now since we've been having these talks and I had to start asking myself before masturbating, wait, why are you masturbating?
Yeah.
What are you trying to do here?
Yeah. We never ask ourselves.
Never ask ourselves.
It just happens.
It just goes. Yes. I have noticed that escalation can happen in one sitting. It can happen over a period of time.
Okay.
But if I'm in it more often for whatever reason I'm in it more often for, sometimes I'll skip stage 1, stage 2 and be like, nope, we're going straight to stage 3.
Yeah. Got it. And I think that your level of awareness and even being able to articulate this is stepping outside of drift. So drift is kind of like you're doing things unconsciously, you don't even know why. And an example from Max's poem, he just talks about, I was kind of using women as vessels for my own masturbation. Like he didn't know that he wasn't connecting to women.
Yes.
He was just kind of like masturbating into another human body. And I think a lot of sex is like that. I certainly know that there are times in my life where I've done that. One thing that I didn't realize until much later on in life and doing like introspection around my porn watching behaviors is that I was always more drawn to amateur porn. And amateur porn, the way that I guess it was defined, or maybe it still is defined this way, is like a real life human being who liked to film herself having sex. So like the two women who I followed for probably 15 years when I was in college, the first woman, her name was Celeste Fox. I don't even think she has a website anymore. She was a real housewife in Atlanta. She was a swinger. She loved to film all of her sex with like her husband, but most likely everyone other than her husband. And then it moved on to a woman named Janet Mason, who was someone that started off as an amateur, and then she became like a very famous MILF porn star. What I couldn't have articulated to you back then, because I was in this drifting stage, is that the reason why I liked that is because it was the first demonstrations I'd ever seen of women having sex where it truly looked like they were enjoying it. Because all the porn I'd seen up to that point was acted. And like on some unconscious level, even like the unevolved, unsophisticated younger Dominick like could tell that the difference between a woman who was moaning because it was written in her contract that she had to, and a woman who was moaning because like she was in ecstasy. And there was just something intoxicating about the way that Celeste and the way that Janet Mason was experiencing sex versus all of these others that seemed to be like, the scenarios were unreal, like, pizza guy coming to the house or the pool boy, like all that shit. It's like goofy shit that just never really seemed to connect with me. I started to realize, wait, there is an underlying level of intimacy even in that I desire, even in the porn that I watch. But when I was in this drifting stage, I didn't realize that intimacy was a part of like my arousal template, let's say. And I didn't realize this could actually extend even further. And I'll put the guardrails on this in a second because you could go way off topic and we're talking about porn here. But I started to realize that in my life, I never really even had that many one-night stands. I've had 2 one-night stands in my life. Because for me, intimacy, the art of seduction, the art of getting to know someone is important to me in my arousal template. That is not a judgment on anyone else who likes to do anything other than that, right? It's just what worked for me. But I wouldn't have known it because I never really stopped to reflect on it because I was in this stage of drift.
Yeah. It's an important realization that you come to only through reflection.
Yeah.
Or somebody stepping in and almost providing some sort of like disruption in that thought pattern.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I know for me, I was literally sitting here thinking a little bit as you're talking. When I'm watching porn, there's 2 types of porn, I think, for me. One is I could see myself doing that. I see myself in that situation, and that's kind of cool. And I think some of the reality stuff is the softer core stuff is some of that.
Yep.
And then there's the other part of the porn, which is like, I'm just curious, or like, I think that's hot, but I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Right. It's just, it's pure fantasy at that point. And again, without doing some deep work on understanding what the reality of porn is, I don't think you come to that kind of conclusion.
Where's the defining line that decides that something is like, you can masturbate to it, but you don't want to go there in reality?
Some of it's pure curiosity. It's just like, what does a BDSM dungeon look like with multiple people in it? Right? Wow, that's cool and interesting and maybe different, but I don't want to dress up in leather and go do that. Right. So part of it, I think, is just
finding the leather, finding the place, not being seen going in and out of it.
Right. Yeah. It's not a normal Saturday night for me. So I think that there's part of just the curiosity. Is there something deeper there? Some sort of kink? Probably. Yeah. I don't know what that line is, though.
I would say that one of the key characteristics of understanding if you're in a stage of drift is to be able to calibrate how far things have escalated. So for example, if like you look at what your search history says now versus a year ago, if things have quote unquote escalated, right? Like you need more drugs to get the same high that you did a year ago, then you know that you're in the stage of drift. So that could be like using, Brian, your examples, like back in the day, if you were spending 80% of your time on that stage one, like that first website that you went to where it's like a woman just kind of showing her top off, whatever. And now it's 80% is in that stage 3 or stage 4 that you talked about, then what you're finding is a pattern of escalation. And that is something that is quite characteristic, especially in the 12-step rooms that I was a part of when I was in Sex Addicts Anonymous for 4 years, is that many of the men, half of the men who were walking into the rooms were addicted to porn and really had, at least from what they had shared, had no other real behaviors that were problematic for them. Wasn't like that they were going to seek prostitutes or on massage tables or doing anything beyond that. It was like half the guys who walked in the room had like porn problems. And they found that like they just couldn't stop. They would make a promise to themselves that they would, and they would constantly override that promise, that they'd be in a relationship where they truly cared about the person that they were sleeping with and they wanted to stop watching porn, but they couldn't. And then it would affect their ability to connect with that woman that was sitting, or the man that was sitting across from them. And so drifting is characterized quite often by escalation. And then also if like you've tried to stop or tried to shift your behaviors and constantly override yourself.
And you hit like 5 really deep points there.
Yeah.
I am reeling right now.
Okay. Well, was there one more than other that was kind of like the shot across the brow?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of escalation, very clear. And I think I provided an example of maybe some smaller types of escalation. But what hit me when you were talking about that was, is there a behavior, let's call it in the real world, that is affected by porn habits? And I was reflecting on some relationships I've had in the past where maybe the sex and connection was really fun at first, but then I would maybe not be as interested in that and then go to more escalated porn.
Yep.
Right? And I've noticed then a drop in interest of having sex with that person.
Yes.
There's a lot, actually, and I'll go back to my story here in a second, but there's a lot of studies out there right now where young guys, we're talking college-age guys,
right,
they're not even interested in actual sex and actually connecting with another woman because they can do porn.
Yes.
And when you ask them, well, what is it? Why do you want to do porn instead of actually connect with another woman? It's, well, I don't have to perform. I don't have to face rejection. I can see things that are more interesting, actually, than I could see in person.
It's just easier.
Right.
Like it takes 2 seconds.
It's just easier. I don't have to think about it. Right.
Yeah. Like you don't have to ask for permission. You don't have to court. You don't have to text them. You have to organize time logistically. Like you feel an urge. And then before you even know it, consciously, your hand's between your legs. Boom. And like you're starting to whatever, you pop up something on your phone. It happens. It's done. It's over. Right. You need a box of tissues. You clean up. The whole thing could take like 180 seconds. You're done. And then the desire to connect with another person has just completely been eradicated. You do that 3 to 4 times a day when you're 18 years old, every day over the course of a lifetime. Shit, like
it'll start to change behavior in real world, right? In connecting with other people. And so that's what I found upon a quick reflection here, and what is playing out in the real world everywhere else.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
drift feels very real to me.
Yeah.
It feels where I probably spent between the ages of, let's call it 16 to 35.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that's a long time period to be unconscious of porn habits and masturbation habits and how that's affecting me and potentially a partner.
Yeah. So what you're saying, another key characteristic of drifting is just like this decreased motivation to connect with another human being. And then even inside of relationships, let's just say for those who are in relationships, when things get difficult, right? So maybe sex has gotten a little bit mundane, or it's become, kind of vanilla, or you've gone through all of the same routines. Instead of like bringing more energy to the relationship and bringing excitement and like introducing new things, you're like, that requires work, or that requires maybe a little bit of fear and insecurity, and bringing up those conversations, you'd start to disappear into porn because that's easier. So I think that's another characteristic of when you start to disappear into masturbation, when you have a partner and you do so through porn versus like trying to invest more into that relationship, that is another characteristic of drift.
Yeah. It's almost like the old adage of like, where you pay attention is what grows. Right. And if you're paying attention simply by yourself in this porn world because it's easier, and not paying attention elsewhere because of that behavior, well, how do you expect to connect?
Yeah.
Right? How do you expect something to grow from a relationship standpoint? Yeah.
I think this is probably going to be a really good place to jump off for the first half of this conversation. In the second half of this conversation, we're going to hit on the final two stages, the 2 Ds of changing the behavior on the hero's journey.
What are those?
Pornography. You have to listen to the next episode. And one of the things that I'm going to be sharing more is about my journey of 4 years off of pornography. What was the impetus behind making that decision? What did I learn? And why have I reintroduced porn back into my ecosystem? And in what way have I done that in a way that is healthy for me?
My story will be much shorter. I'll talk about the time I spent 4 hours without porn, and we'll go from there.
We'll compare notes.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, until next time. Hey, thanks for listening to the Man Amongst Men podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more access to tools and resources, and you want information on our upcoming live events and retreats, head on over to www.doinnerwork.com.